you're familiar with. I've shared on this before to some extent. I don't know if you'll remember it or not, or if you had heard it that morning, but I thought it was a fascinating story. So once I get hooked up here. I see Diane and Dwayne got the note on the color of the shirts this morning.
Yeah, we did. He sent me a note earlier.
As long as we're getting the notes around. Praise the Lord. It says, and Jacob was left alone, and there he wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. I'm sure you're really familiar with the story. I'm going to read a little bit more in context in Genesis chapter 32, verses 24, all the way up through 31. And I read out of the King James Version, just so I can map back to the Strong's Concordance. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he had saw that he had prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, I guess it's pronounced a little different there, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. That just kind of refreshes the story in your mind. I don't know about you, sometimes it's a few years that goes by before I read these stories again, right? Now, have you ever heard people saying that they're wrestling with God in prayer? Have you ever heard that phrase? There's a very good chance that it comes from this passage that we have read. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. It's derived from this text, that idea. And it's implied what Jacob had supposedly done in this midnight experience, right? It's implied that we too must we must wrestle in this prayer life, in this spiritual battle to obtain a spiritual blessing. Now, it's often taught, this story is often taught, interpreted as an allegory, and there is a valuable spiritual lesson in it. There's a lesson when he was wrestling that he was really praying. It's taught he was really praying. That's what was happening, and he was praying all night long with all his might. And that preaches well, and that actually blesses. That story has inspired people when it's taught that way, that this is a picture or an allegory, that he's wrestling in himself in prayer and so forth, and yet he's blessed. So I don't take away from that. There's probably been thousands and thousands of sermons that people have walked away and said, I'm blessed by that teaching, okay? But in light of modern biblical scholarship in the last 125 years, because some of the greatest scholars came out 100, 150 years ago, there's really no interpretation that's warranted to teach it that way. And I would like to share with you a little bit of history of Israel, and let's take a look at this story perhaps a little differently, and you can decide for yourself whether this is perhaps a better interpretation or not. And we don't lose anything by knowing this, by taking this away, because we never lose anything when we learn the truth. In fact, and it's always the goal when we have something taken away, it's because something better is given to you in place of it. So that's my hope. That's my intent So the text says, there wrestled a man with him. Now just think about it. There wrestled a man with him. How obscure is that? There wrestled a man. You know, that's almost, to me, I thought this morning, that's like saying, you know, Paul said, I once knew a man. You know, and I was caught up in the third heaven. Well, Paul, can you be a little clear? You know, most people teach, Paul, that was you. Some teach, no, he knew someone else, and it goes on and on and on, you know. Or there was a man named Job, right? So here, the story just says there wrestled a man. It leaves us hanging. There was a man. Was this man God? Many teach that. It was God himself. It was a divine man, God himself. Some teach it was Jesus Christ himself. Some teach it was an angel of the Lord. And, you know, the beat goes on, right? And we're left in obscurity of who is this man. And then you have to ask yourself, how did Jacob enter this conflict, this wrestling, okay? Is it only a supposed spiritual conflict? Now, these are just questions. A lot of questions we can go through. Okay, is it just only a spiritual conflict, or did you really physically wrestle? And is it a spiritual conflict? And if so, Jacob, how did you enter into this? What caused it? You know, was it your fear of Esau? You know, was it because, you know, you thought that this punishment was always forthcoming because of how you previously deceived him at his birthright?
Yeah.
And you're wrestling with that inside? Okay, now that would perhaps make a good story. Is that what this teaches or not, though? And if so, spiritually, what was it meant that you spiritually strained your thigh? Right. Now, what did that mean? Okay, why did you have to go away limping? Okay? And if it was Jacob praying, these are just questions, if it was Jacob really praying, if this was truly just a spiritual allegory of a spiritual warfare, of him wrestling in prayer, was he praying and wrestling in agony, and what was the reason for it? Was it that he was seeking help? I'm wrestling with this because I just need help in this, or I'm looking for forgiveness, God? I'm looking for forgiveness. That must be it. I'm looking for forgiveness, right? And why did Jacob have to ask his name? These are just a lot of questions, and I hope to answer them. Okay, why did you have to ask his name? Okay, and by the way, where's your contrition in all of this? Remember we taught on contrition, God turns those to destruction, or contrition a few weeks ago in Psalms. Where was the signs of contrition? Okay, there aren't any. Okay, where does the story say that he repented or he was sorry? You know, on account of his wrongdoing to his brother in this story here, it doesn't come out. Even sometimes it's nice to hear a little bit, I'm sorry. That goes a long way in life. You know, my wife went and got pizza Friday night. Went and ordered, and usually I go to 2 different places because we like different pizza from different places, and we don't even like the same pizza. Right. She likes her sausage and whatever, and extra cheese. I like my extra sauce and my pepperoni. 2 different pizzas. I have to tell you this. I really digress, and I think I've told you this before. But let me finish this. And so I went and got 2 pizzas Friday night, and I got the 2 smalls and took them home. And why I didn't open up the box, but then I drove home, 10 minutes, got home and opened it up, and hers was right. Mine was completely the wrong pizza. Mushrooms. I don't know about you. I really dislike mushrooms. So it was the wrong pizza. I had to drive all the way back. I had to call them up. Hey, I got the wrong pizza. My wife goes, wow, you were really calm about that. I said, well, it was an honest mistake. Got back up there, waiting on my pizza. They finally have it done, and the girl goes, that'll be $11. And I said, well, no, actually, I'm exchanging because you gave me the wrong pizza. She goes, oh, okay, there's your pizza. And I went home, and I said to my wife, I said, she didn't even say she was sorry. Like, oh, sorry about that, just a little, oh, sorry about that, here you go. Instead, hey, give us $11 again. Right. So I digress, but once I'm sorry about this, but you just have to long suffer with me on this. So about 10 years ago, so Debbie likes this supreme pizza, and she was getting it from Little Caesars, I guess. And I forgot it was Little Caesars, and I like Hungry Howie's. Most people don't. My wife goes, that's like rubber pizza. Are you kidding me? But my son and I like, yeah, Hungry Howie's. And so I thought she wanted it from, I think, Papa John's or something like that. So I go to my pizza place, Hungry Howie's, and I get my pizza with pepperoni, a large whatever. It's gonna be a really good night, right? And then I get a Supreme from Hungry Howie's, and I'm gonna trick her. And I'm gonna prove to her that she likes Hungry Howie's pizza. So I get a Supreme from Hungry Howie's, but I'm gonna put it in the other pizza box. So I go to Papa John's, I had already ordered a Supreme from there. So I got her Supreme from there, but I'm gonna swap the Supremes. She's gonna see it in this box, eat it, and say she likes it. Well, as I called her, hey, I got the pizza from Papa John, she goes, no, I like Little Caesars. I go, darn. I called Little Caesars, I get a Supreme. I go there and I get it. I got 4 pizzas now. But this is gonna be a great joke. So now I got her Little Caesars box and I'm flipping pizzas around trying to trick her. And I come in the house with these pizzas and whatever. I didn't realize she is home. She wasn't supposed to see all this. She goes, what's all those pizzas for? So it spoiled the whole thing.
Right.
So there you go. So, I spent like $45 that night on pizzas. So all on Supreme pizzas I don't even eat. So
Yeah.
that's the pizza story. All over a little bit of I'm sorry. And Jacob didn't have any signs of contrition, and you learned that about pizza. How do you get that out of that, right?
Don't tell him, brother. Don't
So,
tell him.
I'll tell you. So here's questions going on in this story, okay? And it says, and when he, that's the divine man, or could be God, or whoever this man was, saw that he prevailed not. Well, how do you like that? God didn't prevail in this wrestling match. What kind of God's that? Right? And that he prevailed not against him, Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh. So here's this antagonist, right? And he was unable to overcome Jacob in this story. That's what the story is. The story's true. Okay, but we're trying to sort out, well, what does this story really mean to the children of Israel in ancient days, thousands of years ago? Okay? And it says, the story gets interesting because the man that's wrestling him says, let me go, for the day breaketh. Okay, so now we battled all night long, let me go. Okay, it suggests it was an even match. Okay, it was a very even match. It went into, extra time. No points scored on either side or whatever, right, in wrestling, right? And so how does this fit into an allegory? How does this fit into a spiritual format, the teaching, right? And as you can see, there's a lot of difficulties. Okay, and like I said, we could probably come up and teach some good things, but I don't believe that's what this story meant. I believe, and it's been taught by some phenomenal scholars of old, that it's far more interesting when we understand this story in the light of the spiritual and moral atmosphere of the history of Israel, when we understand it in light of modern biblical scholarship. So the story, let me share with you now what is probably going on here. And you can decide for yourself whether you witness to that or not. But stories in Genesis, there's names, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and these are real people. Right. These are real people, real individuals that lived. But these names, like Jacob, did you know, or did you not know, or however I'm supposed to say that? I'll think about that one. But the name Jacob doesn't only mean a person named Jacob, but in certain places in the Old Testament, Jacob means a tribe. It means a tribe. The word Jacob, and God is referring to the tribe of Israel, right? The Old Testament literature, the name Jacob is often applied to the whole entire nation of Israel. Okay, it says in Isaiah 41, thou Israel art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham my friend. There's one example. He's saying, thou Israel, then he says, Jacob, whom I've chosen. He's calling the whole nation of Israel Jacob. That's just a fact in Scripture. Now hold on to that idea, because you can see what's happening here in this story. Okay? Jacob is wrestling a nation, Israel. Okay? And if we look further back in the history of Israel, it's probable that these legends apply to this text, okay? In Genesis 32, what we have here that I've read you is it's a picture of a crisis of two tribes. It's a piece of prehistoric tradition that describes an actual event, a real event, not an allegory, not something made up. This really happened in the early life of the people of Israel. What I read you really happened, but it's a picture story of what really happened. It was an age-long struggle between two tribes of the Israelites, or we can call them the Jacobites here, okay? Maybe it's a word, maybe. The Jacobites and the Edomites. And a lot of scholars know a lot about the Edomites and the history and how they always fought the nation of Israel. That's just a historical fact, okay? So what we have here is a picture in this book of Genesis. They're describing the struggle between these two tribes of Israel and the Edomites, but they're using the names Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were real people through the scriptures, but when we get to this text in chapter 32, they turn on us and they're giving us a historical lesson that was so important to the history of their nation. And they're describing something because it was a rich treasure that they embraced and that they always look back to. There was a religious and a spiritual significance to this story. In fact, in the end, Israel shows herself a stronger people, although Edom was the older one, because Rebekah said the elder shall serve the younger. Okay, the elder, the tribe of Edomites, shall serve the younger, the tribe of Israel that prevailed in this wrestling match. Okay, now listen, so let's kind of go through this. So here's the history or the story behind it. There was a tribe of Jacob, the nation of Israel, okay? And they were traveling, and this is the real history, they're traveling through this portion of land, okay? And this portion of land belonged to the Edomites. It was their territory. These were nomad people. So, and they're represented by the name Esau, okay, in this story in 32. And they're opposed by these inhabitants coming through. The nation, the small tribe of Jacob, right? They oppose that. So what happens? They make an attack upon this tribe at night. There's a battle at night. That's what the story teaches, okay? And a sharp conflict happens between these two tribes. Now that's what's going on here, and the Jewish mind understood this story. Right. And they're telling their story, hey, and the two tribes wrestled. And the tribe of Jacob succeeded in fighting them off, at least. Okay? They weren't overcome. They weren't conquered. But there was a considerable loss. They didn't do it without having their thigh wounded by casualties, by people, some of their men getting killed or wounded seriously, and they had to carry them off. Okay? Now, consider that as the backdrop when you read this story. And the story becomes a little bit plainer, okay? So Jacob is attacked, okay? He wrestles with this one. He's wrestling with the Edomites, okay? He's wrestling with them. And he knows he's in their territory, but he doesn't know the name of the exact tribe that's attacking him. So that's why he asks, which tribe, what's your name? Right. Tell me your name. Okay, which tribe are you of all these? Okay. And Jacob, in his story, he sends his women and his children across the ford Jabbok. Okay? He sends them across because he wants to, and all the men stay behind to fight. But he's protecting the women and the children, and he sends them across this passage, right? So, and the battle is fought long, and it's fought hard. It says they fought all through the night, okay, until the daylight came up. So there was an equal battle, okay? Israelite proved to be an equal foe to this other tribe, all right? And Jacob was allowed to walk across, okay? He was unpursued, he was carrying his wounded. That was the straining of the thigh. Okay, they're carrying their wounded. And the Jacob tribe, okay, in this story, he sends a present to the leader of the Edomites. So in other words, he sends a present to Esau in this story, okay? Why? He hopes to gain favor of this person that he proved to be an equal foe, and he doesn't want the battle to continue on, okay? And it worked. It actually worked. And he was able to go through their land, history shows, and they were not attacked again by this tribe. Now you might ask, okay, maybe that all makes more sense in the story, but where does God come into the picture? What's my lesson as a student of the Bible, right? You know, what does this do for me? Where's the lesson in this all? Where does God come into the picture? What's the blessing that Jacob obtained and whatever? Now remember, at this time, it's important to understand this, Jehovah was the God of Israel. But all other people, they had many gods. So these Edomites, Jehovah was not their God. Okay, they were not the God. Jehovah was not the God of Edom. All right? All right? And they had many deities. They had many gods. That was common in those tribes back then, but not of Israel. Israel knew Jehovah was our single God. We understand the real God. So the Edomites, they said, let me go before the day break. And they had an attitude towards Israel, a positive one. The lesson to them was, they said, we see, because these were really deeply religious people, and they said, you have power with your God, okay? And you shall prevail with men in battle. It seems like your God favors you. We were, that you shouldn't have maybe been equal to us in force. Perhaps they were smaller in number or whatever. So the Jacobites could never have prevailed without God, first of all. Okay? So their new name was called Israel, God's victor. God said, you're no longer called Jacob, you're called Israel because of this victory, okay? Because you did not get defeated. Now, it's amazing, again, that this event was real. This is really important. In the history of Israel, this battle was so important because it was a religious treasure to them. Because think about it, in ages and ages they've told this story, because if they had lost this battle and been defeated, there wouldn't have been no further seed. Right. There would have been no Christ. There would have been no Christian religion. So think about the significance of this battle that they went through. This little battle just one night long. Right. And in the history of one battle and how important it was, that's why you can see them telling this story. That's how this story is told. Now, this is where the rubber, I think, hits the road, when the relevance or the inspiration to us. What does it mean to us? Okay? And I'm going to wrap up in about 10 minutes, but a conflict between these two tribes took place. That's the history ages ago. All right? But you know what? One of a few lessons. These were deeply religious people. We can look back and in our learnings and our information age and whatever, but I'll tell you, these people, whether they understood everything that maybe we have come to learn, okay, but their dedication and their allegiance to their God, I mean, their very breath in their life every day, these were a deeply religious people, Israel. And they believed God. They believed God for their national or their interests of their nations as a people. They believed God was for them. All right? And they prayed. They prayed. Okay? They had Jehovah. Against all odds, where, talk about peer pressure, everyone else is saying there's multiple gods, and here's Jacob, the nation of Israel, say there's one God. There's just one God. This is the God. This is the Creator. So this ancient story, I think, finds its appeal in the fact of how deeply rooted these people were, so religious. And you know what? They found that strength. In the stories of the Bible, a person with their religious convictions and their spiritual convictions, they found an inner strength that made them stronger, one man stronger than 10 men.
Yeah.
They just found that faith and that belief that they really went deep and whatever, and they really believed that God and they was with them. And as a result, it gave them a courage for the task that was at hand that they would have otherwise not have had. So, and that might sound just small and trivial, but it's really not. I mean, apply that to your life and stuff to overcome things that someone else cannot overcome. It would have broke the normal man and whatever, but you're able to get through it because you're finding this courage and this faith in this God.
Hallelujah.
So these people had a phenomenal, I bet if God could transport us back in time and we spent a month with these people, I think there would be such a conviction, sometimes I think of us, of how religious and spiritual these people really were. And what in different situations and whatever. I think this is one of them. And so there was a recognition of the presence of God, okay? And there's the lesson for us. There's a recognition of the presence of God in a crisis. Okay? They had a recognition of the presence of Jehovah in a crisis, and it got them as a people through it. Okay? And you think about it, we might recognize the presence of God in a crisis in our life. We may end up limping as a result of the process. In other words, there might be some suffering and something, some collateral damage. We thought we were supposed to go through unscathed or whatever, but not so. We might be wounded through that to a certain degree, but nevertheless we get through it because of our inner strength that we find in Jesus Christ. Okay, so we might limp in the process and we might suffer some harm. Our thigh might be wounded in it, just like in this story and whatever, but we still pass over. Okay, and good is that goal, I think, in everything we do, the goal of the goodness for people and others and love and stuff. And that's what I think moves all of creation forward and so forth. So the key in our life is, as a people, we can only apprehend and express God to whatever limited capacity, to whatever we have and whatever measure we've been given. But I think one key in life I'm learning is whatever degree and whatever measure of faith and that God has given me, that I should do it with all of my doing, and nothing less. Jacob fought with everything, every fiber that he had in all those men. Okay, and their belief carried them. And then some people might say, and they kind of look at anything and something like that. That's Jesus said, put down the sword and love your enemies and all that and whatever. And that's just a whole nother discussion, whatever. But there was a strength that was found in overcoming. Okay, and we go through a lot of different battles. We go through a lot of soulish battles. We talk about an age that we go through the bombardment, maybe not physically. 500 years ago, that we have to ride our horse and hope we can find a rabbit to eat in 3 days or something. And physically, or we haven't taken a bath in 60 days or whatever it is. Or, if you get a toothache, you might die from the infection. Who knows, right? Or whatever. But I'll tell you what, we are bombarded in our soul. More so in this age than any other age before, and whatever. So there's plenty of things to find our wrestling match and to overcome. But I would say, just as the tribe of Jacob gave everything, okay, in this, so are we. That the highest that I can see, and the best and the goodness that I can give to someone, well, that's my ideal then. That's the highest I can see in my life in that situation. Well, then, am I doing it? Am I giving it? We talk about, am I doing the will of God? Talk about Christians getting all, bound. Am I doing the will of God? And we have to go down the list. Did I quit my job? Am I in the ministry? Am I going I just need to do the will of God. And you have so many young people just, must join the ministry then, quit their jobs and whatever and somehow serve the Lord. But I think, the will of God, in my estimation, is you take any of the highest ideals that you have to do in this situation of compassion and love and kindness and forgiveness, which I think are all God-given virtues. And in those situations, to me, when we find ourselves doing what we should do towards mankind and other people, then to me that's the will of God. That is the will of God, because we know what we're doing is the right thing to do. Because there's an inner voice of conscience saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. Okay, so I just wanted to say that. I think the last thing I'll say is, so this story, this Jacob tribe, because that's what the story is teaching, right? This Jacob tribe was fighting all through the night for the safety of others. You think about it, they were fighting for the safety of their women and their children, okay? And would they have ever known that one night battle would have such a significance in the history of mankind? Here's this one battle, this one night, and if they had been defeated, like I said, it would have changed the course of history. Okay? And I think the lesson in that is that might have seemed like a small event. A one night battle, but it wasn't. In the story of the nation of Israel, that is so significant. Okay? And I've shared here many times, we have so many divine small opportunities. But you know what? There's great outcomes in it. So here's a one night battle. It might seem small in the scope of battles, and yet the outcome was so great. Think about it. So large compared, and we are given a lot of small opportunities. And we might look at them as trivial, meaningless. Oh, it's so small, and that doesn't seem to be large, and in scale compared to this or that, or what. Why isn't God having me do this versus this? And it might seem small, but we have no idea the outcome of that. And it could be so incredibly large. So incredibly large. Obvious. One example is you might share something. You might share something from your heart. And they might gather that, hey, this person is a person of a spiritual conviction. And you might just say something, and you have no idea if that could turn the whole life of that person around. Their whole life. 50, 60, 70 years, their whole life. And not that, but their generations and their generations. And stuff like that. So just think, I think this story teaches that as well. I really believe it teaches that. So in our individual experience, in closing, I would just ask is, what is my midnight conflict? And do I find myself fighting for a cause of another? We do it just normal life. We think about it. Maybe we live paycheck to paycheck just so we can put food on the table or pay for something or somebody or something. These are not small things in life, that we do for people to take care of other people. And I think that history has scores of victories out of struggles. We already know that, right? We know that there's a lot of victories out of struggle. So let us learn from this religious story, I think, of inspiration and just see how this applies to your own struggles, whatever they may be in life, as far as in situations you might be in, because victory is what is at the end.
Right.
So I hope you enjoyed that. It's a very interesting idea. I find it to be a fascinating explanation of this story, because we're not guessing. We're not guessing. It just seems to explain what was really going on, but yet there's a phenomenal spiritual truth behind it that can encourage us. So with that, I know it's a little bit early, but be blessed.
Man, that's good.